terms of what's happening in the economy. Obviously, Bank of Canada is on a mission to reduce inflation. We had some numbers coming out during the past month that would, I think, determine the next monetary policy decision, which is on September 6th, this Wednesday. First one was the jobs data that came out in July. We lost 6,000 new jobs in July, as comparing to 60,000 that we gained in June. So that's a step towards maybe cooling down of the job market, which has an effect on inflation. Unemployment rate did go up more than expectation. And the other one was the CPI, Consumer Price Index. The headline CPI did go up by more than expectation, but Bank of Canada doesn't consider headline CPI because it includes energy and food. And I think my understanding is that the reason for the last CPI rising was mainly energy. But they look at the CPI trend, CPI core, and that number did come in lower in July compared to June at 3.5%. which is still above the target range of Bank of Canada. Bank of Canada has a range between 2 to 3% range, but it does point towards, again, giving them an excuse to pause. And then we had the consumer spending report, the retail spending report. Basically, it did come in higher than expectation because of car prices. But if we look at the core numbers as far as consumer spending, that number was lower than expectation again. And then I think the last number, which was the nail in the coffin, was the Canadian GDP. The Canadian economy did slow down by about 0.2%. So the expectation was for the GDP to come in at 1% increase, but we had a much lower than expectation number, which I think at this point is pretty much a complete reasoning for Bank of Canada to say that we are pausing on furthering interest rate rises for now. At least that's the rationale if you look at the Canadian economy locally. We also depend heavily on what what the Federal Reserve would do in US, and then if they were to raise interest rates again, we more or less have to follow because of the currency deviations. We basically want to avoid deviating from USD too much. Although Canadian government has targeted devaluing the Canadian currency for so long, but that's the subject of another story. Anyways, so my expectation for Wednesday meeting is pretty much to come in and say we're pausing furthering of interest rates for now, but they would obviously leave the door open for further interest rate hikes if the numbers dictated. And then in September, these are the numbers you see, the measurements you see in the slide are the ones that we expect to have coming in. The one that is important is the Canadian employment report on September 8th, and also the GDP report towards the end of September, and other numbers you can see there, which would help us to form an educated guess in terms of what the next monetary policy decision would be. Anyways, I hope that you find this information helpful. If you had any questions, obviously don't hesitate. I'm happy to help.